Magnus Carlsen, known as one of the greatest chess players of all time, boasts an exceptional track record of dominating nearly every opponent he's played. And while he rarely loses a game, he occasionally faces off against players even more dangerous than himself. Here are a few of Magnus's fastest losses. We're starting off with Judith Pog, widely known as the best female chess player of all time, making history by attaining her Grandmaster title at just 15 years old. Magnus and Judith had played each other a number of times and were familiar with each other's styles, making the game's outcome even more surprising. The game begins with pawn to e4. Magnus responds with c5, opting for the Sicilian defense. Magnus strikes first with a pawn exchange, and after the first few developing moves, he is able to set up his queen while giving a smirk about his board position. Judith pushes her pawn to f3 before casting her king. Magnus is unfazed and remains on the attack, pushing his pawn to b5, then striking with his knight on d4. Judith takes the knight with her bishop, and right after makes a near-fatal mistake. Judith's pawn to e5 allows Magnus to capture another pawn with his knight. This error leaves the board in Magnus's favor, but Judith, being a former 2,700 ranked player, is able to remain calm and creative in these types of situations. Magnus, wary of Judith's skills and abilities, retreats his bishop to f8, creating an opening for Judith to launch a counterattack. Judith pushes her bishop to e4 right before Magnus plays a move he is going to regret. By shifting his rook over to c8, Judith instantly recognizes her advantage and advances her bishop to b6, setting up Carlsen's queen. Magnus, aware he's given up a crucial opening to Judith, has hurt his chances in regaining his advantage. Magnus, being one of the best under-pressure players in the world, contemplates if he can recover from this downfall. But after a couple more moves take place before the king himself resigns from the match, losing in just 19 moves. But this is nothing compared to Magnus's next match versus Alexi Serrana, a 23-year-old Russian grandmaster. This match begins with Alexi initiating pawn to d4, prompting Magnus to counter with pawn to d5, famously known as the Queen's Gambit. Each player begins to develop their own side of the board, with the gambit eventually being declined. Magnus seizes the first opportunity by capturing on d5, prompting Alexi to develop his dark-squared bishop to c4. Magnus mirrors this by advancing his own bishop, giving white a subtle advantage at this stage of the match. However, this moment is short-lived, as Magnus opts for an audacious move, trading bishops on d3. Alexi responds with his queen, once again evening the playing field. Magnus is famously known for his aggressive playstyle, baiting players into trades that will favor his late-game tactics. But this time, it's Magnus who is walking straight into a trap. Alexi, an adept grandmaster, mounts a brilliant knight move to g3, menacing h5's pawn while gesturing toward f5. In a tight spot, Magnus captures f4. However, his following move, pawn to g6, relinquishes his favorable position. Alexi, seeing Magnus had dodged his trap, swiftly releases his bishop to h6, directly targeting Magnus's rook. Frustration rises in Magnus's face as he defends his queen, allowing Alexi to capture the rook. While Magnus is on the back foot, he can't be counted out. A potential queen trade presents itself on d4, which would give Magnus a fighting chance. Unfortunately for Magnus, he misses his opportunity playing queen a2, and Alexi begins his final attack, deploying his rook to b7. As hope begins to fade for Magnus, he desperately opts for a queen trade, which Alexi obliges. Alexi puts the nail in the coffin with rook to a1, and one glance at the world champion's face tells all. Magnus resigns, offering a handshake to Alexi Serrana, the victorious opponent who took down the champ in just 90 seconds. But in this next game, Magnus Carlsen will take on his biggest threat yet. Enter Alexander Morosevich, the former number 2 ranked player in the world, and boasts a peak rating of 2,788. The match begins with Magnus moving pawn to c4. Morosevich responds with pawn to e6, leading the match into a classic Queen's Gambit decline. White presses forward with knight f3, with black advancing their pawn to d5. In classic Magnus Carlsen fashion, he opts to move his pawn to g3, revealing a Catalan structure. Known for his aggressive yet flexible potential, this suits Magnus perfectly as he's renowned for his offensive playstyle. Morosevich, unfazed by Magnus's developments, continues his push, taking Magnus's c4 pawn and ensuring a strong central position. Magnus knows Morosevich is no average grandmaster and decides on a more defensive position by castling kingside. As expected, Morosevich takes more ground, moving his pawn to c6, reinforcing his pawn on d5. Magnus, forced to respond, advances his pawn to b3, offering Morosevich a pawn trade, which he disproves. A strong move by the reigning champ as it allows Magnus to activate his queen, but he is immediately countered by Morosevich's pawn on b4. A brilliant move, isolating Magnus's threat to the queenside corner. The board remains fairly even and both players continue to develop their sides. Magnus sliding his rook into the open lane, while Morosevich takes his opportunity to castle. In this blitz, match time is running low on either side, and both players must remain wary of the clock. The game escalates as a series of moves lead to Magnus threatening Black's king with his now freed queen. Magnus positions his queen from e6 to c8, putting Morosevich in check. Black carries the material advantage with 2 rooks and a knight left on the board. Morosevich is wary of his advantage and retreats his rook to cancel the check on his king. Magnus continues attacking from different angles, but as Morosevich moves his king to h8, Magnus Carlsen takes a look at the clock and knows that he has no choice but to resign from the match. The former Blitz champion in Magnus Carlsen conceded the match in his strongest format. If you like seeing videos of Magnus freaking out, you would like our previous video of Magnus committing an illegal move in a chess match.